My peer collaboration was on using picture books with my ESL students. I used a group of students in second grade that I had throughout the entire year. And my partner was Mark Steinmeier, who came about 3 times to visit and see what was going on. So for my project description, I chose to do 3B using questioning and discussion techniques and 3C engaging students in learning. I felt that this one was a big one considering we were online the majority of the year. And I have a weakness in questioning and discussion, so I wanted to focus on that. Here's a link to some of the research that I did. One of the big things that I got from this was I wanted to use, my goal was to use wordless picture books to increase participation and student scores in speaking and writing in English. But I got this from my research that each reader listens and speaks to create their own story with their own words. So the reason I decided to do wordless picture books was because I thought that because the element of listening to words was taken out of reading a story, it would be easier for students to understand comprehension skills, to discuss what is happening in the story. I wanted to do a big focus on vocabulary and having those vocabulary words be spoken and written. And I wanted to provide students with the opportunity to work together with a partner in their speaking and retelling of the story, or just paging through and telling the story themselves. And I thought it was a big thing that they could create their own story based on the pictures and not really worry about words. So for the steps and activities, I had a little bit of a change midway through the year. In the beginning of the year, what I did was take the story and I decided to model a comprehension skill out of it. And it ended up being very lengthy and long. But one element that I did, so that's one of the elements that I took away in the mid-year. But in the beginning, I would model the skill, and I also modeled storytelling with one of the wordless picture books first. And then we've eventually led our way to I was asking them questions throughout a story, so it would prompt them to tell what is happening. We started off with basically looking at a picture and they would say, I see, they would tell me what they see in the picture. And then it started to evolve into a more of a discussion using predictions and inferencing skills. And then this we stuck with the whole entire time. We did some guided writing about the story or the skill after we had read the story a few times, about 2 or 3 times we've read each story. Like I said, in the middle of the year, I made some changes. I made a bigger focus on vocabulary instead of just focusing on skill vocabulary. I picked out actual words that I thought that they would use when they were telling the story or writing about the story. I stopped doing a direct teaching of skills, and instead we would just read the story. And I would focus on different questions, a lot of making predictions, and by looking at the illustrations, they're very detailed. Inferencing came natural. So students would have their own kind of aha moments, or I would have a question that would lead to their aha moments, and they would look at the picture to give me some answers. I implemented a buddy system. This actually happened a lot more when we had the breakout rooms available, and it was easy to go back and forth between students. I would give them a copy of their story, and after we had read it together 1 or 2 times, they would read it to a partner by looking at the pictures. And we still did guided writing, except for I tried to add some more creative writing to it at the end. So here are some of the books used. We did about 7 or 8 books, but these were the major ones that we focused on. David Weisner is a really good illustrator because he has a lot of weird illustrations and weird books, but they're very detailed. And Mr. Waffles is about a cat that plays with aliens. That was one of the first books we used. And it got them really interested because there's aliens in the book and they love that one. But Tuesday is about 8 o'clock Tuesday night. Um, uh, um, Frogs start flying in the air, and this is when students started to make predictions. We had a creative writing opportunity where students wrote about what would happen next Tuesday when it becomes 8 o'clock at night, and why are the frogs flying in the air. So that one was a fun one. They really liked that. The story Chalk is about students that find chalk in a playground, and anything they draw on the ground, that it comes to life. So one kid draws dinosaurs and becomes not such a good thing, but we use this one for sequencing and writing. So we wrote beginning, middle, and end using transition words. And down here, flotsam, this one was a really hard one because we had to get through the idea of what flotsam is. But this was great for inferencing. It's about a boy who finds a camera on a beach, and it ends up being a camera that has had many adventures, and he develops the film, which is also a foreign concept to them, but he develops the film and sees what happened to the camera. And that was a great one. They loved the ending of that story. So here's just an example of in the beginning of the year, I was trying to teach using sequencing. Those dots that you'd see in the corner is when we would have our major talking points at the beginning, middle, and an end of the story. And I ended up changing that just because it became too lengthy to directly teach a skill using those kind of stories. So I changed it. Here's in the mid-year, I started to talk about vocabulary more. So this was a story called Mr. Waffles, where the cat chases a bunch of aliens and plays with these aliens, and they had to use the word pounce and stalk while they were talking and while they were writing. Some kids did, and some didn't. You'll see in some work samples. And here's the wordless picture book rubric that I used. The students did this on their own. I guided them through each one, and then I eventually graded their work using the exact same rubric. So the things they had to focus on was, did I tell the story using complete sentences? Did I use vocabulary words while telling the story? Did I use capital letters at the beginning and periods at the end? And did I use words from the word bank? Because I noticed a lot of times the word bank is there, but the words are not always used. They'll try to sound out words instead. So here are some examples of student work. I know it's a little blurry, but here's just an example. I have the rubric, I had the word bank, and then I would have a picture and a sentence starter there for them. And this was one of the beginning ones. And this is with my level 1 students. But they would use the words to create a sentence, and it was just what they see in the story or what happened in the story. Here's examples of some level 2 students and level 3 students. We read a story called I Walk with Vanessa, and they had to do the beginning, middle, and end of the story. That was when I was directly teaching skills. But overall, in the end, this is based off of one of the last stories that we had done. But grading the 10 students that I chose, the highest thing that they did was the speaking. When I had split them into partners to tell stories, I would flip back and forth in between each of their rooms to make sure that they were talking to each other, making coherent sentences. Each student was taking turns. I was listening for transition words like first, then, next, last, which they seemed to do really well. Towards the end, they also were able to tell the story using Flipgrid. So I have some Flipgrid examples of students going through each page telling exactly what's going on. So they did the best on that. A bit of a struggle we had was using the vocabulary words, mostly in the writing. Since they're new words, we'd have to use the words over and over and over again in our speaking, and it was quite a struggle to get them to use it in their writing. Some of the students, like one of my level 3s, Archangel, who has a pretty decent vocabulary already, would automatically use those kind of words when he was doing his writing. Their conventions, I think, was about 68%. Just I was looking for capital letters at the beginning, which most of the time I gave them because of sentence starters and periods at the end. And the last part was using their accommodations, which was one of the harder things to do, making sure that they were using the words in the word bank and sentence starters. So moving forward and concluding this, some pros that I found with this is that it was a great way to introduce vocabulary. Although it was harder to get them to write the words, using them in sentences when I would prompt students was a little easier. I loved that the students interacted with each other. We had great discussions together in a whole group, but when I would put them in breakout rooms and they could work together, they were really into each of the stories and looking at the pictures. Even just telling them what they saw in a picture was giving them an opportunity to speak when we were mostly muted for an entire year. And students loved having the aha moments. Like I said, there was a lot of inferencing going on, especially if you page through one of the stories by David Weisner. You have to pay attention to the illustrations, and those illustrations give clues to what happens in the end of the story. So they loved having their little aha moments when I would prompt and ask a question. It lended to good questioning techniques and good inferencing skills. So I just like that it made it easier compared to a wonder story where you're trying to deliberately ask a question and about what's going on, and it's like pulling teeth sometimes. So this was a lot easier than using a wonder story. And students were able to tell their own stories. Sometimes I was looking for a specific ending to a story or a specific telling of a story, and a lot of times they did do that, but it was nice that how they came up with the ending of a story. That they were always different. So next year, moving forward, I love this technique and I'm probably going to do it again, but I'd like to be a little bit more organized with how I roll out the stories. I just kind of found stories this year, but next year I'd like to find stories that relate more to the content that they're learning in their classrooms. That way we can make more connections with vocabulary and more concept connections. I'd have to do a little more research for that over the summer just so I can plan it out a little bit better, but I'm definitely going to go do this again next year with these students because they definitely enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and I hope you can use this in your classrooms. Thanks.